In the grand story of American wealth, history often pauses only on the male name. That name is Collis P. Huntington, the railroad titan. He was one of the powerful Big Four who forged the Southern Pacific system. Public records describe him as relentlessly focused, impatient, and ruthless. His energies were fixed on contracts, profit, and expanding his track mileage. Yet the Huntington dynasty was built around a constellation of women. 4 distinct lives orbited this immense fortune, quietly shaping its future direction. There was Elizabeth, the first wife, who provided New England respectability. Then came Arabella, the controversial second wife, who for a time became the richest woman in America. An adopted daughter, Clara, crossed the Atlantic to secure a German aristocratic title. Finally, the niece, Mary Alice, whose marriage and subsequent divorce reshaped the next generation of Huntington wealth. These 4 intricate stories rarely surface alongside the Astor ballrooms or Vanderbilt mansions. Their world stretched west of the Eastern social gaze, from Civil War contracts to California boulevards. Their story moves from rough Sacramento depots to libraries filled with rare silks and rare books. It moves from scandal-whispered New York drawing rooms to the palm-lined avenues of Los Angeles. The usual Gilded Age narrative always turns east, toward Fifth Avenue and the legendary Mrs. Astor. The Huntington women managed their money through endurance, taste, and patience. The public myth centers on the man and his railroads. The tracks were his, the contracts his, and the colossal fortune his. The private reality was far more intricate. The first wife managed the home that allowed him the freedom to chase those contracts. A later wife selected the art for their walls and signed the checks for charities that softened his reputation. These women negotiated, smoothed, and endured, with one eventually inheriting almost everything. The hidden architecture of dynastic wealth shows that women were the essential, quiet, load-bearing walls. The story begins with Elizabeth Stoddard Huntington, a woman who never saw herself as an heiress. She married Collis in 1844, long before the Southern Pacific existed. Raised in the ordered modesty of New England Protestant life, the marriage preceded the family's great leap into California ambition. Her world shifted from small-town regularity to the improvised chaos of a Western venture. While Collis speculated and travelled constantly, Elizabeth maintained a necessary stability. She held together the fragile domestic base that enabled his restless ambition and mobility. In the architecture of old money, there is always a first unseen stage. One woman stretches every dollar while her husband bets on a future others cannot yet perceive. Elizabeth occupied that foundational position. Period accounts show Collis in perpetual motion, focused on deals and letters between the coasts. Behind these movements stood the quiet fact of a wife who did not abandon the difficult experiment. She had to accept distance, great uncertainty, and the social embarrassment of his rough manners when measured against Eastern refinement. This was not the glamour of later San Marino. It was an economy of survival, fueled by high-risk railroad money. That contract and subsidy money passed through her hands as careful household economies and necessary expenses. Elizabeth's influence was not expressed through art galleries or salons. Her power lay in her loyalty to a man many considered socially impossible. That respectable wife and recognizable background anchored his early legitimacy. She served as the moral cover for a man who swore easily and bargained hard. This pattern repeats across many great dynasties. The first wife absorbs the strain of the climb, enduring improvisation and anxiety. Her name rarely adorns later museums, but her stability is what creates the old money to speak of. The couple had no surviving biological children, which created a profound dynastic problem. Property, name, and legacy all required an heir to carry them forward. Then Clara arrived, not born a Huntington, but entering the household as an adopted daughter after her parents' death. The adoption was an act of charity on the surface. but it also solved the dynastic need for an heir. Elizabeth raised Clara as her own, anchoring the household, while Collis remained focused on the business world. She managed the daily work of schooling, health, and etiquette. This training was vital if the girl was to marry into the circles Collis now courted. Elizabeth's authority was moral, never legal, described in letters as influence. Her respectable presence provided a solid background for his enormous risk-taking in the West. Elizabeth died in 1883 before the Huntington fortune reached its full power. Elizabeth's death opened a critical space. Into that space stepped Arabella Duval Yarrington Huntington, a profoundly different kind of woman. Her origins were contested and murkier than Elizabeth's, her reputation far more complex. Arabella understood with unusual clarity the powerful possibilities contained inside a vast fortune. The relationship with Collis began as a liaison while Elizabeth was still alive. It was an uncomfortable position, existing as an open secret. Where Elizabeth offered moral legitimacy, Arabella offered a partnership that mirrored his own immense ambition. She brought a flexible sense of propriety and a willingness to operate outside rigid Eastern social codes. This dynamic reveals a persistent pattern in old money systems, the tension between the sanctioned wife and the unsanctioned partner. The two women, Elizabeth and Arabella, existed in parallel lanes of the same man's life. Elizabeth held the formal social approval. Arabella developed a private understanding that would later reshape the entire fortune. When Elizabeth died, the path cleared, and Collis married Arabella in 1884. This union cemented decades of social discomfort among New York society keepers. The Eastern gatekeepers remembered the controversial timeline and watched the marriage with narrowed eyes. Arabella's son, Archer, was adopted into the family and positioned as a new male heir. After Collis's death in 1900, his second wife stood in a highly unusual position. Arabella inherited the bulk of the estate, gaining control of an enormous share of the fortune. By some estimates, she controlled enough capital to be considered the richest woman in America. Wealth alone did not guarantee social acceptance in the East, where lineage and the manner of acquisition mattered profoundly. Society routinely overlooked male brutality in business, but was slower to forgive perceived irregularities in domestic life. Arabella responded with a new strategic approach. If certain drawing room doors remained closed, she knew other doors would open in galleries and libraries. If Mrs. Astor's guest list could not be controlled, the walls of a museum certainly could. She channeled her money into prestigious French furniture, European old masters, and rare books. These objects carried their own centuries of undeniable cultural prestige. Arabella constructed a visual argument for her own sophistication and refinement. In this, Arabella diverged from her Eastern contemporaries. Alva Vanderbilt pursued social triumphs by staging spectacular balls. Arabella built vast, retreating collections instead. Both women utilised architectural and aesthetic choices to argue for their belonging. One asserted status through private performances in Newport, the other asserted it through cultural patrimony in California. Excluded from the social hierarchy, Arabella innovated by building cultural authority that did not rely on a calling card ritual. Arabella's influence was not limited to her widowhood, it reached into the next generation. Clara Elizabeth Prentice, Collis's niece and eventually his adopted daughter, entered the story here. Adoption in wealthy families served not only as an act of affection, but also as a form of financial architecture. Redefining the relationship allowed the patriarch to direct property and influence along a chosen path. Clara's new legal status changed her prospects dramatically. She moved from the periphery of the wealthy clan to its core. This shift translated directly into eligibility for an aristocratic European marriage. The Huntington story followed the classic dollar princess route, starting from a Western origin point. Clara married into German nobility, becoming Princess Frances von Hatzfeldt in 1889. The new name carried European rank. The Huntington money carried undeniable New World purchasing power. This was a classic pattern. American industrial fortunes secured legitimacy by marrying into cash-poor but rank-rich European houses. The stepmother-stepdaughter relationship between Arabella and Clara was affectionate, defying the expected rivalry. Letters show Clara addressing Arabella as "dearest Belle." This affection was strategically sound. If stepdaughter and stepmother presented a united front, it softened the lingering scandal of Arabella's origins in society. Arabella and Collis funded the marriage, using large cheques to cover the dowry and presentation in Europe. Their support turned Clara into a bridge between American capital and a German title. Arabella helped craft Clara's public image, essentially sponsoring her entry into a different social universe. While Arabella commanded the main capital in America, Clara translated a portion of it into European presence. Both women provided distinct, necessary forms of legitimacy for the family. On the American side, another woman, Mary Alice Prentice, wrestled with the family name. She was Collis's niece and the sister of Clara's mother. Mary Alice married Collis's nephew, Henry E. Huntington. This internal union consolidated the fortune through kinship, keeping property inside a controlled circle. Mary Alice first occupied the conventional role of wife to a rising businessman. Henry built his path through the Southern Pacific network, speculating in real estate and Los Angeles streetcars. Mary Alice managed the domestic spaces of this upward movement, adapting their homes and family life to his demanding timetable. She maintained the domestic order during the crucial years leading to the purchase of the San Marino estate. Then the dynastic pattern shifted suddenly. Henry divorced Mary Alice, an outcome that appears sanitized in official narratives. The immediate consequence was dramatic. After her death, Henry married again, choosing Arabella, Collis's widow. This rearrangement created a complex, often bewildering web of female roles. Arabella, once the scandalous outsider, became Henry's wife. The wealth from one generation was grafted onto the next through this second controversial union. Mary Alice, the legitimate link between branch and trunk, was displaced from the central narrative. These shifts highlight a core reality of old money life. A woman's status within a dynasty could rise or fall dramatically based on marital decisions made behind closed doors. A new signature on a marriage certificate could brutally rewrite a woman's decades of domestic investment. Male histories treat these events as footnotes in business achievements. Female history recognizes them as profound, disruptive earthquakes. They meant social positions altered, homes lost, and allegiances forcibly rearranged. The aftershocks rippled outward into the California cultural landscape. The Huntington wealth materialized in buildings and land, not just in ledgers and bonds. Outside Los Angeles, the San Marino estate grew into California's sophisticated answer to Eastern mansions. Its core was formed by gardens, libraries and galleries, deliberately replacing the East's focus on ballrooms. Inside these spaces, the choices of women left lasting marks. Arabella determined the paintings that would hang and the objects that belonged together. Her influence shaped how the family collections were assembled and eventually offered to the public. Eastern women like Caroline Astor controlled access through a guest list limited to 400. That ballroom boundary defined social standing and marriage seasons. The Huntington women used different architectural instruments to assert their power. Their controlled spaces featured a library reading room rather than a ballroom, or a quiet rose garden rather than a cotillion. The principle remained the same. A curated, controlled space signaled what the family valued: After Collis's death, Arabella took total authority over the $70 million estate. Other relatives contested the will, arguing that the widow had exerted undue influence. This family challenge echoed a common pattern of male relatives insisting a second wife took more than her proper share. Arabella won, and the courts upheld the will. Until her death in 1924, she exercised both financial and cultural control. She directed investments, managed properties, and oversaw the health of the entire estate. The woman who began as a footnote in a married man's life ended at the centre of a financial and cultural machine. This is the ultimate ironic reversal. During Arabella's life, exclusion from New York society cast a permanent shadow. Whispers about her origins and conduct persisted in drawing rooms. In death, the extraordinary collections she assembled became the object of universal admiration. Curators and scholars praised her exceptional eye for quality. The former outsider quietly became an arbiter of cultural memory. Mary Alice, the divorced wife, also experienced a complex reversal. The divorce that removed her from the centre of the story did not erase her contributions entirely. Her years with Henry overlapped with his crucial professional ascent. The domestic order she maintained formed the necessary stage for his later plans to play out. The work of reconstruction begins when historians look back at the quiet letters and legal records to restore that initial presence. The Huntington fortune did not descend through a simple, neat male line. It moved through legal instruments shaped around nieces and wives. It moved through adoptions, philanthropy, and art purchases. It moved through marriages that either fractured or joined the family branches. Across these movements, the four women experienced distinct, illuminating fates. Elizabeth, the first wife, provided stability when nothing was yet guaranteed. Arabella, the second wife, commanded vast capital, carried the burden of scandal, and filled the houses with enduring beauty. Clara, the adopted daughter, exchanged Huntington money for a continental presence, living with the consequences of that transatlantic alliance. Mary Alice, the niece wife, embodied the system's vulnerability. Her divorce demonstrates how quickly a woman's formal position could vanish on paper, even when her labour was woven into the dynasty's foundations. The Huntington women offer a clear case study in pattern recognition. Wealth built on rails and land filtered through female lives and hands, not just male signatures. They show how a fortune can shape cities and art, while also profoundly reshaping the inner landscapes of the women who live closest to it. Today, the trains have stopped running and many corporate names have disappeared into mergers. What remains are the slower, more enduring structures. The gardens still bloom in the San Marino sunlight. The library reading rooms still hold pages once chosen in a Parisian dealer's office. Collections bear a single simplified surname. Behind that name stand four distinct women: Elizabeth, Arabella, Clara, and Mary Alice. They reveal a quieter, more intricate story of how American wealth moved and left its lasting marks in the hands and strategic choices of women. The official public myth centers on a self-made man building his railroad empire. The documentary record reveals a more layered truth. Family networks, legal structures, and political access amplified that individual ambition. Within that complex network, women quietly repositioned fortunes, art, and lives across multiple generations. The archives are finally allowing researchers to recover the names that faded. They are bringing forward the first wives, the scandalized second wives, and the daughters whose strategic marriages rewrote entire family maps. The Huntington women are no longer missing from their own story.